Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I bought this house, I thought I had found the perfect place. Peaceful, spacious, and most importantly, free from an HOA dictating what color my mailbox should be. But I was wrong. They came. They demanded, they threatened, and when I refused to comply, they set me up. But they made one mistake. I don't go down without a fight. When I bought my house, it was one of the few properties in the neighborhood not under the jurisdiction of the newly formed Homeowners Association, HOA. And that was exactly how I wanted it. No unnecessary fees, no ridiculous rules about mailbox colors, and no self-important committee breathing down my neck. At first, everything seemed fine. My neighbors were polite, and life was peaceful. But then, the HOA representatives started showing up at my doorstep. The first time, it was just a friendly visit. 3 people in matching polo shirts with the HOA logo knocked on my door, all smiles and practiced charm. The man in the middle introduced himself as Frank Lavrau, the HOA president. He had the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Good afternoon. We're just going around welcoming new homeowners to the community," he said, handing me a glossy brochure. "We'd love for you to join the HOA. It really helps keep the neighborhood safe and well-maintained. Everyone's a member except a handful of properties like yours." I already knew where this was going. "Thanks, but I'm not interested," I said, handing the brochure back. "I prefer to handle my own property." Frank's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his posture. The woman next to him, a sharp-eyed blonde named Karen Ross, stepped in. "You know, we offer a lot of benefits," she said. "Community events, security patrols, dispute mediation, and of course being in the HOA means your property value stays protected. It's a good investment." I crossed my arms. "I understand, but I'm happy the way things are." Frank chuckled. Of course, we won't push. But I do hope you reconsider. It would be unfortunate if complications arose." That last sentence sent a small chill down my spine. It wasn't an outright threat, but it was close. Before I could respond, they thanked me for my time and left. I brushed it off as nothing. That was a mistake. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. First, I started receiving violation notices, which made no sense since I wasn't even in the HOA. The letters accused me of improper lawn maintenance, parking violations, and failure to comply with community standards. Each one came with a hefty fine. I ignored them. Then came the damage to my property. My garbage cans were knocked over almost every morning. My mailbox was vandalized, and someone dumped a bucket of paint on my driveway in the middle of the night. When I confronted Frank about it, he acted genuinely surprised. "Oh dear," he said, shaking his head. "I had no idea. That's terrible. But you know, sometimes neighborhoods just don't take kindly to outsiders who won't contribute to the community." "Outsiders?" I narrowed my eyes. "I own my home just like everyone else here." He shrugged. "Then maybe it's time you start acting like it. The offer to join is still on the table, by the way." I clenched my fists, but forced myself to walk away. He was testing me. That's when the rumors started. I used to have friendly chats with a few of my neighbors, but suddenly people started avoiding me. A woman I'd waved to every morning turned away when I greeted her. Another neighbor, who once helped me jumpstart my car, now acted like I didn't exist. I overheard whispers, people saying I was trouble, that I had a shady background, and that I was bad for the neighborhood. The worst part, I had no idea where it was coming from until I stopped by a local hardware store and ran into Paul, an old man from down the street. He hesitated before speaking, but finally muttered, "You should know. The HOA's been telling folks that you're some kind of criminal, that you've got something to hide." I felt my blood run cold. "That's a damn lie," I growled. Paul sighed. "I figured, but people listen to them, and they've got a lot of influence." Then came the final straw. One night, around 2 a.m., I was woken up by a loud banging on my front door. I grabbed a baseball bat and peered through the peephole, only to see 3 HOA board members standing there, including Frank and Karen. "What the hell do you want?" I shouted through the door. Frank's voice was calm. Too calm. "We need to inspect your property," he said. "We have reason to believe you're engaged in illegal activity." I froze. "Excuse me," Karen chimed in. "We received an anonymous tip. If you've got nothing to hide, you'll let us in." I laughed out loud. "You think you have the right to search my home? This is private property. "You're trespassing. Get the hell off my porch before I call the police." Frank exhaled, shaking his head. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I stepped closer to the door. "And you're making it real easy for me to file a harassment lawsuit." Silence. Then slowly they backed away. As they walked down my driveway, Frank turned and smirked. "You'll regret this." The moment my door shut, I locked every bolt and grabbed my phone. I needed to talk to a lawyer. Now, the next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, David Klein, a sharp, no-nonsense guy I'd worked with before on a property dispute. If anyone knew how to handle HOA harassment, it was him. The second was to a security company. After what happened last night, I wasn't taking any chances. David picked up on the first ring. "Let me guess," he said. "HOA trouble." "More than that," I muttered. "They showed up at my door at 2 in the morning, demanding to search my house. Said they had reason to believe I was up to something illegal." David sighed. "Classic intimidation tactic. They're trying to scare you into compliance." "Yeah, well, it's working," I admitted. "Not in the way they want, though. I want to hit back legally." "First thing," he said, "install security cameras. Inside and out. Make sure you get clear footage of everything. HOA has been known to pull stunts like this, and you need evidence." "Already on it," I said. "Good. Second, I'll draft a cease and desist letter. If they keep harassing you, we'll take them to court for intimidation, trespassing, and defamation." "Think it'll stop them?" A pause. Then, "No. But it'll make them think twice before they pull something worse." That wasn't exactly reassuring. By the end of the day, my house was covered with top-of-the-line security cameras. A professional team installed motion sensors, night vision, and real-time alerts straight to my phone. I made sure there were no blind spots. Front yard, backyard, driveway, every entrance. I even installed a few hidden cameras inside just in case, and just in time. That night, at 3:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion detection alert. I jolted awake and grabbed my phone. The live feed from my backyard camera showed 2 figures creeping along the fence line, both dressed in black, both wearing gloves. My heart pounded as I zoomed in. One of them pulled out a lock-picking tool, heading straight for my garage door. They were trying to break in. I didn't hesitate. I called 911 immediately. 2 intruders at my property trying to break into my garage. I told the dispatcher, "I have security footage. Send officers now." I stayed on the line, watching the video feed. Then suddenly, one of the intruders froze. His partner tapped his shoulder, and they both bolted into the darkness, disappearing before the police arrived. They knew. They realized there were cameras. And that meant one thing. They weren't random criminals. They were here for a reason. When the officers arrived, I showed them the footage. "Looks like they knew exactly where they were going," one of them muttered. "They didn't bother with windows or doors, went straight for the garage." "Do you think this is related to the HOA?" I asked. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "Can't say for sure, but let's just say this isn't the first time we've had complaints about HOA intimidation tactics around here. Can you do anything about it?" "Unless they actually break in or we catch them in the act, there's not much we can do." I clenched my fists so they could try again, and nothing would happen. Before leaving, the officer added, "You did the right thing getting cameras. Keep them rolling. And if you notice anything else, call us immediately." As the squad car pulled away, I stared down my empty street, my skin crawling with unease. The HOA wanted something from me, and they weren't done yet. A week passed. No more late-night visits from the HOA. No more attempted break-ins. It was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I wasn't naive. I knew they weren't done with me. They had tried harassment. They had tried intimidation. They had even tried breaking into my home. And they had failed. I should have known they'd escalate. It was a normal afternoon. I had just sat down with a cup of coffee when red and blue lights flashed through my front windows. A convoy of police cars pulled up in front of my house. At least 6 officers stepped out, hands resting on their holsters. A firm knock rattled my door. "Police, open up!" I stood, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't some routine check. Something was very wrong. I opened the door, keeping my hands visible. A sergeant in uniform stepped forward, holding out a piece of paper. "We have a search warrant for this property," he said. "Step outside, sir." I blinked. "A search warrant? For what?" The sergeant's expression didn't change. We received an anonymous tip that illegal activity is taking place here. We have probable cause to believe there are prohibited substances on the premises. I felt the world tilt. Prohibited substances? My first thought was that this had to be a mistake, a mix-up. Maybe they had the wrong house. But deep down, I already knew this wasn't a mistake. This was a setup. 2 officers stepped past me, their boots heavy on my hardwood floors. I couldn't do a damn thing to stop them. The sergeant motioned to the others. Sweep the house, every room. I watched, helpless, as my home was torn apart. Drawers yanked open, cushions slashed, closets emptied onto the floor. They were looking for something specific. I could do nothing but stand outside, my hands clenched into fists as neighbors gathered on their porches, whispering and watching like vultures circling a fresh kill. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I heard one of the officers call out, "Got something!" My stomach dropped. An officer emerged from my house holding a plastic bag filled with something I had never seen before in my life. It was small, but unmistakable. Prohibited substances. I froze. My mind went blank. The sergeant turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Sir, you're under arrest for possession of prohibited substances with intent to distribute." Wait, what? That's not mine. I don't know how that got there. The officer ignored me as he rattled off my Miranda rights. My wrists were yanked behind my back. Cold metal snapped around them. My neighbors watched as I was dragged to a squad car like a criminal. I shouted. I struggled. I wasn't guilty. But none of that mattered, because as far as the law was concerned, I was already guilty. And the HOA had just won. The ride to the station was a blur. My mind raced, trying to grasp the impossible reality unfolding around me. How the hell did prohibited substances end up in my house? I sat in a cold interrogation room, hands cuffed to the table, staring at the wall. I knew I was innocent. I had never even seen that bag before, let alone hidden it in my home. But I also knew that the evidence was real. The police didn't plant it. Someone else did. Then a single thought cut through my panic. The cameras. I sucked in a sharp breath. I had everything on tape. After what felt like hours, I was finally allowed my one phone call. I dialed David Klein's number with shaking hands. He picked up on the first ring. Jesus Christ, what the hell is going on? They found prohibited substances in my house, I said, my voice tight. I've been arrested. A beat of silence. Then, no, absolutely not. There's no way that's real. It's not, but someone put it there. David exhaled sharply. Listen to me. The cameras. You recorded everything, right? Yes. Then we still have a chance. I'm on my way. An hour later, David stormed into the station, his briefcase in hand, his face set in stone. I need to speak to my client. Now. Minutes later, we sat across from each other in a small conference room. David placed his laptop on the table and pulled up my security footage. Let's see who set you up, he muttered, scrolling through the recordings. I watched, my breath held tight in my chest as the time-stamped videos played. 3:14 a.m. 3 figures approached my house. They were careful, methodical. One of them picked my back door lock, fast, like a professional. They moved through the house with precision. They knew exactly where they were going. And then we saw it. The moment when one of them slipped a small bag into my air vent, the same bag the police had found. David swore under his breath. There it is. That's your proof. But my blood ran cold when one of the masked figures turned toward the camera, glancing up for just a second, just enough for the light to catch his face. It was Frank Lavrow, the president of the HOA. I felt a surge of rage so intense I could barely sit still. That son of a... David raised a hand. Breathe. We've got them. This is more than just a setup. This is conspiracy, breaking and entering, evidence tampering. This is serious. I gritted my teeth. They tried to ruin my life. Over what? A power play. David nodded grimly. HOAs have done worse. But now, we take this straight to the cops. With a click, he downloaded the footage onto a flash drive. Let's get you out of here. And just like that, the HOA's little game. It was over. The moment David handed the flash drive to the police, everything shifted. The officers who had once treated me like a criminal suddenly looked uneasy. The sergeant who had arrested me watched the footage twice, his face turning pale. You're telling me, he said slowly, that the HOA president and his cronies broke into your house, planted prohibited substances, and then tipped us off? That's exactly what happened, David said, his voice like steel. "And now you have video evidence proving it." The sergeant straightened. "We're going to need a warrant." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the tide turning. Within hours, the police obtained a search warrant for Frank Lavrau's home and HOA offices. And when they executed it, they hit the jackpot. Police seized HOA documents, financial records, and personal communications. And what they found was even worse than I had imagined. 1. Emails between HOA board members discussing how to deal with me. 2nd, bank transactions linking HOA funds to hush money payments made to other homeowners. 3. A ledger tracking fines and penalties, most of which had no legal basis. They were just ways to squeeze money from homeowners. 4. Blueprints of my house, plans marking weak entry points. They had been watching me for months. When this went public, the entire neighborhood exploded. The trial took months, but it was one of the biggest scandals the county had ever seen. The prosecution came down hard on Frank Lavrau and his co-conspirators. Breaking and entering, falsifying evidence, conspiracy, defamation, obstruction of justice. The list went on. Each of the HOA members involved received serious punishments. Frank Lavrau, HOA president, 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and unlawful entry. Karen Ross, HOA board member, 10 years for aiding in criminal conspiracy and coercion of homeowners. Todd Williamson, HOA treasurer, 8 years for financial fraud and illegal fines. Mark Geller, HOA security lead, 7 years for breaking and entering and unlawful surveillance. Several other HOA board members who weren't directly involved in the setup but had engaged in fraudulent fines and harassment were also charged with civil penalties. And the HOA itself completely dissolved by court order. When news broke, the community turned on them instantly. I had spent weeks being treated like a criminal, but now, the same neighbors who had once whispered behind my back were now furious at the HOA. The local news covered the trial extensively, exposing just how corrupt the HOA had been. Homeowners rallied together to file additional lawsuits for years of unfair fines. Some families moved away, disgusted by what their so-called community leaders had done. Others demanded full refunds of every cent they had ever paid to the HOA. The remaining HOA assets were seized by the court and liquidated. Every penny went into a fund for victim compensation. And me. The judge ruled in my favor on all counts. The court recognized that I had been framed, harassed, and publicly humiliated. I was awarded $2.3 million in damages, compensation for emotional distress, legal fees, and lost time. Full reimbursement for all fines and expenses related to the HOA's harassment. A public apology from the county police for how they had handled my case. The best part, Frank Lavrau's house was auctioned off as part of the settlement. And who bought it? Mr. the house of the man who tried to ruin my life. I now owned it. And the first thing I did, demolished it. As I watched the demolition crew tear down the last remnants of Frank Lavrau's empire, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. The HOA was gone. The corrupt board members were behind bars. The neighborhood was free. And me? I was finally at peace. Because in the end, justice wasn't just served. It was obliterated. Justice had been served. But for me, the battle wasn't over. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to make sure they never crawled back from this. Frank Lavrau and his HOA had spent months trying to ruin me. Now it was my turn to finish the job. Owning his former house was symbolic, but demolishing it? That was personal. I made sure the entire neighborhood saw the wrecking crew arrive at dawn. The sound of the first wall coming down was music to my ears. The same neighbors who had once whispered behind my back now stood on their lawns, watching in stunned silence. Some of them had defended the HOA, blindly following their rules. Others had simply been too scared to speak up. But now, they saw what happens when you mess with the wrong man. One woman approached me as the dust settled. Mrs. Calloway, an elderly woman who had lived here for over 30 years. She had never spoken much before, but now she looked me in the eye and said, "Good for you, son. That bastard got what he deserved." And that was only the beginning. With the HOA officially dissolved, homeowners were left scrambling. Many of them had paid thousands of dollars in fraudulent fees, And now they wanted every cent back. Lawsuits poured in against the former board members, and since their assets were already seized, their personal properties went up for auction to cover the damages. Karen Ross, once the smug enforcer of the HOA, lost her luxury SUV and half her retirement savings. Todd Williamson, the treasurer, was forced to sell his house to pay restitution. Mark Geller, the so-called security expert, went bankrupt. And Frank Lavrow, he sat in a prison cell watching everything he built crumble to dust. I made sure he saw the footage of his house being torn down. It wasn't enough to just beat him in court. I wanted him to feel it, to know that I had won. But revenge wasn't just about them. It was about restoring what they took from me. With my compensation money, I didn't just rebuild my life, I made it better. I expanded my property, added state-of-the-art security, and made sure no one could ever pull this kind of stunt again. As for the neighborhood, without the HOA's iron grip, it changed. Some homeowners left, unable to function without someone telling them what color their fences should be. But others thrived. People started talking to each other again, no longer afraid of fines or anonymous complaints. One night, I stood on my newly built deck, looking out at my property. For the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. The HOA had tried to break me, but in the end, I buried them.